Species.
So I'm not someone that you would classify as sentimental about animals. I think that's a very fair statement to make.
I agree. If you listen to the show, I would agree historically that is correct.
Yeah, that is correct.
Mm-hmm.
So being a dog owner
Mm-hmm.
with Mindy the dog, who is our rescue dog from the Henrico Humane Society.
Right. Multiple time convicted felon as a dog.
Pretty much, yeah.
Or whatever. Spent some time in jail.
She was rescued from a rescue that was a prison rescue that would send dogs to prison to be trained.
Right.
And was gaming the system by sending the same dog back and back again.
One thing I wanted to ask you.
Yes.
Is she really well trained because of that? Did it make a difference, you think?
Something happened to her. I am starting to get sentimental about the dog.
Okay. So,
but she has some reactions to things that she's seen some stuff. She's been, I think, left alone a lot. But she's also a dog, very needy, very hairy. And, initially when she came to the house, I was a little bit, I think my position in the house of being the needy, hairy beast was being infringed upon. But I've started to have affection for Mindy. And I've finally hit the point of being in a situation where discussing my dog with another person, and I was offended and felt defensive for my dog.
What did they say?
So, as you've heard, Minnie the dog has been in prison multiple times. Doesn't play very well with other dogs. Doesn't attack dogs or bite them, but we've had to kind of work with her to get her to know other dogs. And in the time of the vid, going to a dog park with a bunch of people isn't a very feasible thing.
Okay.
So as we walk the dog throughout the neighborhood, we'll get to meet other dogs. And someone had moved in our neighborhood several months ago. In our initial meeting with them, their dog pretty much ran at Mindy, was off the leash, ran at her, didn't bite her, but kind of, very bad first impression.
Yeah.
And I've had other occasions when I've been out, actually just a few weeks ago, when the same dog ran at Mindy off leash. Now, the owner stopped it and it came back. But Mindy's initial impression is this dog is going to attack me. So whenever Mindy sees this dog, she starts barking, gets fired up.
Yeah.
Which I'm used to, and we've trained her to not do that to most dogs. With this dog, she always does that. And I sound like the kid who's like explaining why Caden, is killing hamsters with a hammer, and it's not really his fault. But let me continue. So recently, saw the other dog with the owner, and Mindy barked, and the owner suggested, have you ever thought about getting her a bark collar? And you were
offended. This is the owner of the dog that charges.
That charged, and I had that moment of clarity of, do I point out, the reason she doesn't do this with anyone else, and I think that's what I said was, she only does it for your dog.
Okay.
But was gravely offended, and also was concerned about telling my wife that.
Right.
Knowing that she would be offended, but I also felt like I couldn't keep that from her.
Oh, you have to.
I
did.
did.
That's some good righteous indignation.
Yeah.
I mean, if it hadn't been for the thing where the dog was charging, then I could see where it's like, come on, man.
Yeah.
But no, that's fair. So, yeah.
And did have an incident several days later that I was walking Mindy and I saw the neighbor without that dog, and noticed that Mindy was very quiet.
Okay, I thought you were going to say that you confronted the neighbor at that point and said,
well, I also had my moment of clarity. I was like, do I tell this person that? And I realized that, whereas I am getting very sentimental about Mindy the dog, who is awesome, I also think too, you got to kind of, you got to save that for a certain situation. And maybe, hopefully the person saw, oh, she's not spazzing out right now.
As much as I would love to make fun of you for this and say how you used to be the guy that was like not that much of a dog guy, and I feel betrayed a little bit because we both used to be like, look at how these people treat their dogs.
Yeah.
I actually see where you're coming from on this one. If they are complaining, and that's the thing, maybe they're complaining about how much Mindy barks, you know, and that would get your hackles up if you knew that was happening. So that's very fair. But I do sometimes feel a little betrayed because I remember when I had a dog,
right,
and I would sometimes complain about my dog. and you had a standing offer to let the dog out, to release the dog.
Oh yeah, or assassinate it. I think I offered to take it.
You did?
I'll say it on recording.
Okay, because I wasn't going to say it.
Yeah,
you did actually
I
offer that, and I will tell you that I had my moment of clarity, because there were moments where I was like, you can't talk about my dog like that, because it's one of those things where it's like, when it's anybody else's dog, who cares? When it's your dog, you do get a little like, well, it's okay if I say that, but you're going to assassinate my dog? How dare you?
Yeah.
But it never happened. But now to see you with this bond with Mindy the dog is, I feel a little bit betrayed by it.
Right.
But I also, because you've really leaned in. I mean, you've got the matching pictures.
Yeah.
You've got the everything. And good for you. Dogs are good.
Yeah.
And I don't dislike dogs. And I might get a dog again someday.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna complain about that dog to you, because you never know what might happen to the dog. You might sick your ex-convict dog. See, now hopefully that doesn't hurt your feelings.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
And to show that I'm objective, like if you did get another dog, it probably wouldn't be good to leave that new dog along with Mindy, because I don't know what prison habits she still has that maybe she could pass on to another dog. Like I don't want to come over to your house and find out your dog's been making shivs or bourbon in the toilet, or started, doing tattoos with ink pens.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, Mindy is a good dog. Mindy has been over to the house, and Mindy was so cute and cool and like chill. So you do have a good chill dog. And she didn't bark once when she was over here. She had a good time.
That's right.
And we found her curled up, by the door and doing well. So,
and just want to clarify on the record too, that when your dog did pass away eventually, I had nothing to do with that.
Okay, good, because she was really old, and that would just be extra cruel if you waited right until she was already about to die anyway, and you went ahead and poisoned her food or something. Welcome to Origin of Species. My name is Scott. I'm here with my good friend Steve, here for another episode. Steve, what are we going to be talking about tonight?
We're going to look at some words and phrases today that revolve around the term bait.
Bait, like
bait.
B-A-I-T, bait.
Yes, like bait. I've had this on my list for a long time, and one of the reasons I wanted to do it was so I could play this sound clip.
Oh, that's go away, baitin'.
Which is just fun.
Yes.
And, every time I looked at my list, I would be able to see that. But as I did some research into these terms, and there's several bait terms.
Yes.
The ones that the main one I'm going to focus on today is clickbait. So that'll start us off. That'll be our first bait term. And it's a term I feel like I don't necessarily hear often.
Yeah.
But I feel like I see the effects of it daily.
It's pervasive. It is pervasive. And I'm sure you'll get into this, but I mean, it started with, there used to be like the little pop-ups. Remember pop-ups? I guess there still are pop-ups, but everyone is trying to get your attention now. So clickbait is very relevant.
And especially as now that we get most of our information online. I remember as a child, you had the 6:30 news that was a family event for us. We watched the news every night at 6:30, and you saw what happened that day. A lot of our news and information is driven online, especially through social media. And I feel like we've also just come out of what I would call the clickbait presidency. That for the last 4 years under President Donald Trump, I think we've kind of seen, maybe not specifically clickbait, but the kind of idea behind it.
Yeah.
On, hot button triggering sort of articles and declarations.
Getting your attention, using words or some sort of picture or mechanism to get your attention in the midst of all this information.
Yeah. And, something that also inspired me that I had shared with you that recently during the Capitol riots, I had Facebook send me an email of somebody that I generally unfollow on Facebook, making a very provocative comment during that.
Yes.
That was essentially clickbait.
Right.
Like Facebook knows that I unfollow this person frequently.
Right.
Yet during a awful event in our nation's history, Facebook's algorithm decided, you know what, who needs to know what this guy had to say? Steve.
Right.
So it's also interesting, too, we'll talk a little bit more of as we kind of end the clickbait presidency, we're already seeing a lot of your major news channels trying to figure out how do they live without Donald Trump as their main event every night, the gift that keeps on giving.
Well, I went to CNN.com today, and there were like 6 articles about Trump, and there are no articles about Andrew Cuomo.
Right.
Which I'm like, isn't he kind of in the news with some of this nursing home stuff?
Right.
But clearly, people that are going to CNN are they know. I mean, they're not dumb. I mean, people are gonna click on it. Just the name Trump. Now, will that happen forever? Probably not. But maybe.
Right. And to be diplomatic too, I'm fairly certain if you log into foxnews.com right now, there will be an article about AOC somewhere.
Yeah.
She basically is the daily thing. So
she's very clickbaity.
Yeah. But so, and then I thought also of our conversation we had several months ago with Professor Joe Usinski.
Yeah.
When he discussed the idea that you and I, or maybe our listeners too, think of the news as this is what happened today.
Yes.
Whereas the news now is driven a lot by what's going to get you clicks.
I was just on that same subject. I was just listening to the Tim Dillon interview with Anna Kachian, and he was saying how there are only 6 journalists in the world or something. Like, it doesn't even seem like there are journalists really anymore. I mean, there are some obviously, but it's everything's working differently. It's like, this is the news, and it is driven a lot by ad revenue and who's going to click on what more so than, because what are you going to read?
Right.
It's our fault. That's the thing. It's our fault. So not to jump ahead, but if we stop clicking on clickbait, maybe it would do something. So.
Right. So I'm going to talk about the etymology of the term. I'm going to talk about its history and its influence over the last couple decades, and also how it's affected the way that we use the internet. But I'm also going to analyze the anatomy of clickbait. We're going to look at what makes clickbait and what are some elements that put something together that provokes us to click on it.
Right. There's a formula.
There is, and we're going to learn it. And I'm going to probably, to see if I've mastered this, please follow us on our social media accounts at Species at Twitter and also Instagram to see if we figured out the formula, if we can suck you in.
Have we baited you to watching our show or listening to our show?
Or you have to say,
go away, baitin'.
So before we talk about clickbait, let's talk about like the real root of that word.
Okay. The
word bait. From Edom Online, bait, a noun, food put on a hook or trap to attract prey. Originates circa 1300 from the Old Norse term beta, food or bait, especially for fish, from beta, cause to bite. So I think it's a great illustration. You throw a hook in the water with some bait on it to grab a fish, trap you in there.
Yep.
Also, another version of that word from around the same time is to torment or persecute someone. To set a dog to bite and worry an animal, especially a confined one for sport. So that also derives from the same Old Norse term, beta. Also, from that eventually... the term hunting derives from that later. In High Middle German, bays, or hunting, comes from that. So it made me think of the idea of bear baiting.
That's exactly what I was thinking
which, you would think at face, it would be something that would really get me excited. But it's also kind of a gross little thing where basically you tied up an animal and let a dog at him.
Ew.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking more of like a bear trap, because when you said... it's like torturing or whatever. I was just thinking it was like you let a bear with a, bloody leg in a bear trap for a long time. That's kind of torture. But you're actually talking about like some freaking, like something out of a Eli Roth movie for bears.
It's almost like some sort of like the grandchild of Roman spectator sport. Instead of lions eating Christians, you have dogs attack bears. And as everyone who listens to this knows, I live life loaded for bear.
Right.
Even that's a bridge too far for me. You got to let that's,
You want to kill a bear, not torture a bear. Nobody,
Yeah, I don't want it to suffer, but I do want to, I do definitely, it's on my bucket list to hunt and kill a bear. Or somebody I know that would be willing to dress up like a bear.
Yeah, this is getting a little scary.
Yeah.
So bear bait, and then again, that's something I don't want to Google.
When I hear someone say they're baiting, I don't want it to involve a bear.
Baitin'.
So, bait means to kind of hook or track something, but also to torment and persecute someone. So maybe there's some like hidden lesson in the term of clickbait that we didn't even realize.
Oh, wow.
That's there. I think I just
blew my mind
I did. I think I blew my own mind with that. So to define the modern term clickbait, we go first to Merriam-Webster. Something, such as a headline, designed to make readers want to click on a hyperlink especially when the link leads to content of dubious value or interest. So I think with that, you see that clickbait, you're not hitting the latest philosophy or great American novel or really important news. It's more of something that's going to kind of hit you get you in a way that attracts you.
I mean, how are you going to not click on, like, you won't believe what Tina Yothers looks like today. I mean, and then like a picture of like, half of a leg or something. And you're like, I need to know what Tina Yothers looks like today.
And I agree with you. And maybe if you hear an awkward pause in this episode, it could be that we went to find out what Tina Yothers is up to this second.
Well, I was going to look up real quick just to make sure she hadn't passed away.
Yeah.
And no, she's 47. And she looks kind of great based on these. See, I had to know if that's good clickbait.
Yeah, we made it happen, and maybe we'll use that. We'll see if we can conclude this episode with making a good Tina Yothers clickbait.
Well, the real test right now, if you're listening, did you just go to your phone and type in Tina Yothers?
Yeah,
I bet there are some people that did, because that's what I would do if I was listening right now. And if you don't know who Tina Yothers, is it Yothers? If you don't know who Tina Yothers is, you didn't grow up in the 80s, and that's okay. Keep moving.
Yeah, keep moving on, and you probably can still keep moving without back pain, unlike Scott and I, because we're old. So, Merriam-Webster, we like that. Good dictionary, but it's not the OED.
No.
So the OED also has clickbait in there. So from them, clickbait describes online content that's designed to encourage the user to click through to a certain web page. Clickbait usually involves sensational headlines or images. And we have the actual first use of this. The term clickbait was invented by a gentleman by the name of Jay Geiger in a blog post written in December 2006. So according to his blog post, he defines clickbait as any content or feature within a website that baits a viewer to click. Anything interesting enough to catch a person's attention. More often than not, clickbait uses highly alternative text and phrasing, controversial slogans or ideas, or culturally inspirational descriptions or events. So just some of the examples we've talked about already.
Yeah.
There's an attack on the Capitol, and I get a message from Facebook showing a sensational comment by somebody.
Right.
Also, we talked about the question you put earlier. You won't believe what Tina Yothers looks like.
Right.
It comes back to that. So something is interesting about this clickbait. You see Jay Geiger's name in his blog post come up frequently. So I had to go to the Internet Archive Wayback Machine to go find this. And what's interesting is when you find the article, it states on there now, most likely you came here from dig.com. Thank you for partaking in our reverse psychology clickbait experiment.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So all the citations I've found don't mention that. But when you do get to the site, you still have the definition he gave there. So a little bit of an interesting spin on the history of that, of Jay Geiger and his great contribution to us to define the term of what drives everything that we do here on the internet.
Yeah, very interesting. By the way, I don't know where to slide this part in, but we're doing a bait episode.
Yeah.
And the best bait of all time that would also be great clickbait, the movie poster for Gator Bait. You remember Gator Bait?
I do remember Gator Bait now.
I've never seen Gator Bait. The poster for Gator Bait, and I know this is apropos of not much, but was definitely a big part of making, young Scott into a man. Yeah. I've never seen the movie, but I just kind of looked up here, Gator Bait, the poster. It holds up. Gator Bait 2, not bad either.
Right.
So any of the ad wizards out there, you want good clickbait?
No.
You can start with Gator Bait.
I just flashed back to being in a mom and pop
yes,
VHS video store with one of those salacious posters that up there.
I'm so glad. I was afraid you wouldn't have remembered, but you aren't going to find the Gator Bait poster in Blockbuster.
No.
But any mom and pop one.
Yep, in 1987 is probably going to have that. And a little bit of another aside, one of the baits we didn't discuss was jailbait. Basically because the story's not that interesting, and the older I get, the less funny I find that subject.
Yeah, as both of us having daughters, it's not as good. But the Gator Bait, as far as I know, the Gator Bait poster, no jail bait, nothing to worry about there. Definitely, we're gonna see how many things we can make people look up in this episode. So far, Tina Yothers and Gator Bait.
Yeah, so we're doing good things already with this. So clickbait is something now that just kind of makes sense. And as we spend time on the internet, it makes sense that you would have something that would draw your attention. And the fact that it, maybe appeals to not the best part of you makes also sense with that's pretty logical how it would go.
Yeah.
But being here and living in the clickbait world that we live in, it makes sense. But where did this come from? How did this start? So I'm going to rely heavily on an excerpt from a book called The Attention Merchants by Tim Wu that discusses the history of clickbait as part of that. And we're going to go back to 2001 and a gentleman by the name of Jonah Peretti. So Jonah Peretti was one day searching the web, and he noticed that Nike, he could go there and order personalized shoes, and got back an email from them that he didn't care for, saying that his order that he tried to have personalized, it was withdrawn because of inappropriate slang. And the inappropriate slang or term that he used on there was sweatshop.
Okay.
Which,
Nike has a filter for anything that has a sweatshop on it.
So he sent back a response to them in which Nike didn't care for that and canceled the order. And then he sent back another email that concluded, could you please send me a color snapshot of the 10-year-old Vietnamese girl who makes my shoes? Thank you. Or thanks. So he sent this email out to 12 or so friends. And in 2001, they didn't really have the term went viral.
Right.
But his email went viral.
Okay.
It got out there. It was picked up by the Today Show, and he became a little bit of a internet celebrity.
Yeah. It actually sounds kind of familiar. I feel like I may have even heard of that when it happened.
Yeah. But it was a big inspiration for Jonah. And he is actually, from here, becomes very involved in the growth of what would become clickbait. The response he saw to this really opened his eyes of what the internet could do and what could happen when something gets out there that catches someone's eye based on the response he got just from this email exchange.
So he got the aha moment of why did people react to this? How can I do this again kind of thing, or how can people do this?
Right. So fast forward a few years, and there is a website then associated with the right wing. I don't even know if you say that as much anymore recently, but the Drudge Report.
Yeah.
An aggregated website of news that really hasn't changed. It still looks the same way it did in 2000. And that was a website that became big during the Clinton impeachment scandal.
That is a great example, because it's like they had every headline was clickbait, really.
In the mid-2000s, Drudge was associated with the right. The left was interested in making their version of the Drudge Report. And from that was born the Huffington Post.
Yeah.
So in addition to Arianna Huffington, there was another partner that founded the Huffington Post, Jonah Peretti.
Oh.
So Jonah had kind of learned from his initial experience with that, that had grown in some other ventures that he had.
Wow.
But became big with the Huffington Post. And the Huffington Post, I think, was very key in kind of news starting to evolve into clickbait. They followed the Drudge Report idea of being an aggregator. They're not really bringing news, but they're taking news that are out there, but also adding kind of sensationally headlined articles.
Right.
And generally there'd be a provocative picture with it. An example is a bikini-clad celebrity. Watch naked Heidi Klum and Seal's new video.
Right.
It's technically news, but is it? So they took kind of more of a left side stance on things, brought in some celebrities, but also started really focusing on the headlines, bringing people in, and it being, whereas there was news on the site, not necessarily everything was news. And it was a little bit of what I think in business they call a loss leader. You sell that DVD really cheap to get people in the front door and hope that they're going to buy something else once they're there.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's also too, I feel like with Drudge Report and HuffPo, and now a lot of places, the headline itself and the picture almost tell the story that they're, you take more away from that than the article itself. Sometimes maybe I'll click on the article and kind of scan to see, wait, what? What happened? But it's probably not good for our attention spans.
Right. So after several years at Huffington Post, Jonah Peretti decided to move on to another venture. that venture was BuzzFeed.
Ah.
Now, BuzzFeed, I think that Huffington Post kind of started the trend, but when I think of clickbait,
yeah,
I think of BuzzFeed.
Yep.
BuzzFeed to me is a site, I should know this, but they're still around. They actually are still around. They've evolved and do things, and I actually, now that I've said it out loud, I actually know someone who works there. But they to me are clickbait.
Yeah, I agree. It's so interesting, though, that one guy was able to make such an impact on like Huffington Post, but then the fact that you would think it'd be something that could be copied and anybody could do it, but then it took him and whatever he knows to start BuzzFeed, which is the sort of the pinnacle of this.
And you could see it as the article I'm quoting from Tim Wu. This section starts, "The web hits bottom," or BuzzFeed. So you could see that he kind of takes it to another level. So here's some examples they list. Which ousted Arab spring ruler are you? You might be cleaning your penis wrong. 37 things conservatives would rather do than watch Obama's State of the Union speech, and 29 cats who failed so hard they won. So, with BuzzFeed, we really see, I think, clickbait go to another level, and as just based on the things we listed there, not really news, but definitely things that could suck you in. At the same time, you start to see some other websites, Mashable, Upworthy are a couple that come to mind. At the same time, The Onion developed their own clickbait themed site called Clickhole.
Oh, yeah.
Which I have to give them credit for. One of the best articles that they put was entitled, "The Time I Spent on a Commercial Whaling Ship Totally Changed My Perspective on the World." And with that article, they published the entire book of Moby Dick. Under that headline.
That's pretty good.
With the author being noted as Ishmael,
right.
sailor. So with BuzzFeed too, you started to, I think, see at this time a little bit more of, you have a standard now of how to do clickbait. Right. And I think from here you start to see it spread a little bit more into not just websites that you really wouldn't, I would hope that people wouldn't go to BuzzFeed for their news, but you start seeing Upworthy, Huffington Post, Gawker, and the Gawker family of all their different things, Deadspin, Lifehacker, things like that. It starts to kind of proliferate and get out there.
Right. And it also, I'm thinking this through as you're talking just about how things have changed with the internet. And, the comment I mentioned earlier about journalism and how it's changed, because there's just so much content, and a lot of it, I mean, if you read these articles, they're not particularly well written, right? You read some of these, not that I'm, some sort of great journalism critic, but I mean, you read some of them and you're like, somebody got paid like a penny a word or something to write this. This is terrible. It's all in the headline. It's all, you clicked there, it's over now. Like there's really nothing of substance in here unless there's some good teeny others information other than that.
So regarding the influence of clickbait on news headlines, several years ago, the University of Texas at Austin, their Center for Media Engagement, did a study investigating the influence of clickbait news headlines. So a couple big findings that they found were question-based headlines lead to more negative attitudes about the headline and more negative expectations for the associated news story. And also that news source brand matters for headline and story perceptions. So I think a couple things from, we've talked about, there's the appeal of seeing the naked model. There's also the appeal of getting that negative reaction that you really like. You go to Fox News and you see AOC and it makes you angry and you click on it.
You love it.
You go to CNN or for Donald Trump clickbait and whoever else they'll find to replace him. Right. Which I keep waiting to find the day that CNN is going to somehow like prop him back up, like put him on Twitter or do something just so they can. Because he's 80% of their daily coverage. Right.
Well, let's talk about this though. It's this is sort of what I was getting at before too with the Drudge Report headlines in the rest of these now, where it is an interesting dynamic because what you just said, the study about do you have an expectation based on the news outlet, but also the title of the article. So you want to be outraged kind of. Right. You see this, you go to Drudge Report and you see some two-word headline with big bold letters. You get this sort of feeling of, oh my gosh, something big's happening, something that I'm either upset about or I like. Then you click on the article and you're like hoping that that is reinforced within the article somehow.
Right.
So that has to have some kind of influence on the type of articles that are written, right?
Exactly.
Hey, we got to back up this titillating headline, and then you end up with a lot of outraged people,
right?
Which we see happening. So it's actually very interesting how clickbait has had a big, and specifically this guy, Jonah Peretti, very interesting.
Yeah. So, and as you were saying too, that if I go to Fox News and see AOC, I don't expect an objective article about her. I expect it to be negative. If I go to CNN.com and there's something about Donald Trump, I'm not expecting them to be objective. I know kind of what I'm getting into with that.
And it also almost doesn't even bother me anymore. Like, I go and it's like, hey, they're catering to people that want to be outraged about this person. So there may be a shelf life for this sort of thinking, or they're going to have to get more creative, because at a certain point, it's like, we know what you're doing. And now if you want to be in the echo chamber and click on all the headlines that know are going to make you feel that righteous indignation, then maybe you'll go there. But at a certain point, you're kind of like, okay, we know what we're doing here. This is kind of masturbatory if we're doing bait words.
Yeah, and I think that's actually good. But in the same way, it's almost like a drug of heroin's not good for you. Yeah. But people still, no one's doing heroin going, this is going to make me a better person. Yeah. But you know what you get out of it.
Hey, I told you, I went to CNN.com today, and it wasn't to get like trusted news. It was because I'm like, what are they bitching about today? You know?
And you know that you're going to find out.
Yep.
We've discussed what clickbait is.
Yes.
But what specifically is it what is the anatomy of a clickbait headline? Right. What makes something clickbait?
Right.
So I'm going to go to an article on Thengage.com entitled 7 Reasons Why Clicking This Title Will Prove Why You Click This Title.
Interesting.
By Nadia Koja, who does marketing and has been featured in the Huffington Post. Marketing expert, again, featured in the Huffington Post. So I think she knows what she's talking about. Yeah. And what she tried to do is analyze different clickbait titles and come together, like, what is the formula? Okay. What makes a thing? So she asked herself some questions that I think would be pretty common things that you would look at. Was the title a list? And BuzzFeed is legendary for having their 37 things about your penis that you didn't know, or something like that.
Lists work. Just ask.
And they work. Yeah.
Tennis podcast.
Exactly. And I think it's a way to compartmentalize, and especially if things are picture driven.
Yep.
Other things she looked at, was there a mention of you or I, or a personal story aspect to the title? Was there an animal mentioned? Was there an element of shock or excitement?
Right.
Another thing she pointed out was there an unknown or new concept mentioned in the title? And she gives 2 examples of how you could say the same thing, but in different ways.
Okay.
And she asks, which title are you most likely to click? This duck just swam across the pond to get to the other side, or you'll never guess why this duck swam across the pond.
That's right.
It just even performs there. Her analysis found that 29% of the titles mentioned you or I, or hinted at a personal story. 63% made a pop culture reference or mentioned food. The same percentage, 63%, also mentioned recent events in the news and media. But as she puts, an overwhelming 79% of the articles contained an element of shock.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, like you're not expecting, I hate to keep going back to Tina Yothers, but
no.
There is a thing where you won't believe, or guess what? And you're like, oh my God, what?
Yeah.
What?
And it appeals to you and makes that.
And then, by the way, the thing that really, I don't click on those anymore, but the thing that was always the worst with those was you'd click on it and you'd be like, okay, show me Tina Yothers. And then it's like a slideshow.
Yeah.
You got to click through 20 things, and like in between time, you get like some ad for like Acorns, or,
Oh, yeah.
It's like, what, screw it. I don't care that much about what Tina Yothers looks like, but they don't care.
But because you've clicked 7 times to get to that point, and you've made money for somebody.
Made somebody money, and you've wasted your time. And you've also like kind of let them off the hook with the story, like matching the headline, because if you never get to the end, you're like, you know what? I don't care if she looks like, I don't care if she grew a second head. I can't click through another one of these slides.
Exactly.
But they are kind of off the hook, because if you really do go to the end, I mean, she just looks normal.
Right. And that will lead very well to our second topic. Would you say that is perhaps a bait and switch?
That is a bait and switch.
So that walked into that very well. Thank you, Scott. So before we, summarize what we learned today, I think the big question is clickbait bad? Is it really such a bad thing that websites who are generating income are putting provocative titles to make you click on them? Because that should be their job, is to draw you in. They're in business for a reason.
Yeah.
CNN, Fox News aren't here just, for the common good. They're there to make money and to generate revenue and to bring viewers in. I think the danger is that in doing that, there's more of the appeal to shock. There's more of the appeal to negative connotations.
Yes.
Not inspiring you. You're not clicking to see that the plane landed. You're clicking to see that the plane crashed.
Yeah.
As we've used examples countlessly, you go to Fox News, they're talking about AOC. It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
They're not appealing to your best intention.
Well, they appeal to shade and fraud for one. They appeal to, like you said, having a sense of righteous indignation.
Right.
So it does sort of appeal to your worst.
Yeah, and it's very masturbatory. As you said earlier, you get to sit there and feel self-righteous about AOC, but have you learned anything? Have you really done anything? And again, I think back to our conversation with Professor Joe Usinski several months ago about the clicks driving things. QAnon is something that people are starting to hear more about.
Yeah.
But especially when we talk to him, the people that were really into QAnon, he describes it again as a cult-like thing. And I think we've seen evidence of that in their reactions, but it's not this widespread. There were articles, but it was shocking. It was a recent news event. The president was involved. There would be something shocking or unknown brought up in that. I mean, it's typical. There's more articles about QAnon than actually participants or people that believe in it.
That's so
and
true.
Again, not to say the people that really do believe in it aren't dangerous or there's issues with that, or it is a problem.
Right.
But it's not this widespread. They're not up there with the Methodists and number of attendees or people that believe in it.
Right.
It's clickbait.
Right.
And I've often wondered how much of that has become a self-perpetuating situation.
Absolutely.
That the more it was talked about, the more it ended up actually advertising this thing that no one really believed in.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of examples of that. I won't start listing them off, but there are a lot of examples of that. I totally agree.
Yeah. So in summary, clickbait originated in 2006 in a blog post. The concept of it was really perpetuated by Jonah Peretti, who started with a viral email in a pre-YouTube, pre-social media era. Was grown through him at the Huffington Post and also really, I think, got into the culture with BuzzFeed and its successors. And unfortunately, I think is something that is part of the mainstream news media, right or left, wherever you go, you're going to see this. And I think it's something to now know what constitutes a clickbait title, some of the element of shock or a list or a personal connection, that we can maybe all be a little bit better and wiser in what we click on and make sure that we're not having, our worst instincts appealed to.
Unless it's gator bait.
Then
click to your heart's content.
And now, new slang.
All right, Steve, the term queerbait has been around a long time. I'm sure you remember it from middle school and high school.
So this is new slang.
This is new slang.
Okay.
So, but let's start with queerbait. Here's how Urban Dictionary defines the term. Any male who attracts considerable amount of gay lust, wittingly or unwittingly.
Okay.
The new boy on the cell block, or an unsuspecting altar boy. So this is a problematic term, and I would never bring it up as a topic for discussion on the podcast, as you noted.
Right.
It's been around for a while. It's not new slang, except for the fact that I hadn't heard the term for a while, and I knew that we were doing a bait episode.
Right.
And I mostly spent time looking up gator bait movie posters.
Right.
But I also was thinking about other words, and I remembered queerbait. I remember being called that. And just it was just one of those things.
That was a thing that boys called I don't think.
Yeah, it wasn't. You didn't mean it in the way Urban Dictionary really said it. Really, you were just calling them gay. I mean, and it was the same thing with, like, we talked before about Gay Blade, and that came from that Zorro movie, which was pretty great. But back then, you'd hear people calling each other Gay Blade, and I had no idea. I knew it was an insult for some reason, but I didn't know why.
Right.
So I decided, let me Google this term just to see if that was even real or like something that just was at our school, because I hadn't heard this term in forever.
Right.
And I found something else almost immediately.
Okay.
And it's a new word. And that word, it's not queerbait.
Okay.
It's queerbaiting.
Queerbaiting. Okay.
Which is totally different. Have you heard the term queerbaiting?
I have not heard that term. I've only heard it in our kind of junior high many years ago way.
Okay, well...
That lines up with what Urban Dictionary said. Yeah,
so the reason I even feel like I can say the preceding stuff to give a little context is to talk about this because it's an actual phenomenon. Queerbaiting, according to Wikipedia, is a marketing technique for fiction and entertainment in which creators hint at, but do not actually depict, same-sex romance or other LGBTQ representation. Mm-hmm. And they do so to attract or bait a queer or straight ally audience with the suggestion of relationships or characters that appeal to them while at the same time attempting to avoid alienating other consumers. Okay. So they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. So let me give you an example of this.
Sure.
Imagine you're a young lesbian in the 80s.
And with my haircut, it's very easy.
And you're watching The Facts of Life.
Okay.
You may watch the show and see Joe and Blair as a potential lesbian couple. Okay. Even though that was never overt. And frankly, even I, as a young boy, had never even heard the word lesbian or knew what that was. Had my suspicions about Joe. Yeah. Something was different. Yeah. So the idea being, if you're lesbian and watching this or something, you're going, they're lesbian, you know, but because, especially back then, you couldn't just come out and say that. Right. You lose all your sponsors. That would be an example of potential queer baiting. Okay. A more recent example would be the show Killing Eve. Okay. So if you think about it, and you've seen that show, right? Villanelle and Eve would definitely fall into this category. Yeah. Seems to be, there's some subtext there perhaps. And frankly, there's even a debate. I kind of got into this reading about this is it even overt that they are, a couple or something or that they do have those feelings for each other? But the conclusion was, no, this would fall into that category as well. So, and frankly, technically, we could be accused of queer baiting just with all of our talk about being in the closet together. Yeah. If you had been there for the photo shoot, you might.
Or if you see our photos, I think that, my very sexually provocative outfit could be seen as.
Absolutely.
Because I am #diverse and we promote #pride. And we're definitely not, as we discussed during the virtue signaling episode, rainbow pandering. No, definitely not doing that.
Actually, it's interesting you brought up rainbow pandering because that's this would fall under that.
I would think umbrella. So too. Yeah, of like we're gonna allude to something, but do it in a way that maybe you're not gonna see if you're someone who's offended by that. Right. And I think it makes sense now too because it's a good way to provide yourself cover. That if something else happens, I could see that you could appeal to the virtue of, this thing might have happened during the filming of this show. However, we promote this and kind of have a little bit of rainbow washing, which is also a term we brought up. And by the way, Katie Martell is responsible for both those terms of rainbow pandering and rainbow washing. I want to make sure to give her credit for that.
Very good. Very good. So there's a debate about this whole queerbaiting idea and whether or not it's a good or bad thing. We'll get there. So I did find an article called The 25 Most Egregious Acts of Queerbaiting on TV from a website called autostraddle.com.
Okay. So it sounds like you got clickbaited into, that is a list with a number. And
well, I think I searched queerbaiting on TV and I got the top 25, but it struck me just the idea. Like I hadn't heard this word 2 hours prior. Right. And the fact that you had to break it down to just the top 25 most egregious acts on TV was pretty, kind of blew my mind. And this is just TV. So let's browse just a couple of these. I hadn't seen most of these shows. They're probably half of these had to be on the CW. Yeah. But Rachel and Quinn from Glee, and most of these are like women. Watson and Moriarty from Elementary, which I guess is one of the millions of shows dedicated to Sherlock Holmes. Pretty Little Liars, Spencer and Arya. Buffy and Faith from Buffy the Vampire Hunter. The aforementioned Joe and Blair. They have to be on any list like this. Right. Daenerys and Missandei from Game of Thrones. Okay. May have heard of that one. And last but not least, Laverne and Shirley. Yeah. Maybe the first.
I could see that. They were roommates. They did spend a lot. They're kind of like the Bert and Ernie of ABC sitcoms from the 70s, and maybe that's another one of
Bert and Ernie
yeah.
is better than any of those. That's
Yeah.
the best. That is the best. Well, no, I think they came out. No, it's possible.
I don't know.
You know, that's just, but that kind of proves the point. I'm not going to
Yeah.
Google it. The one thing I did think was funny, that this list, I just looked at 25 of these, mentioned a few of them,
Right.
and Sherlock Holmes wasn't on there. There was the one with Lucy Liu, but not the one with Benedict Cumberbatch. And why I think it's funny is if you just Google queerbaiting, there's like a big picture of Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman.
Yeah, and when you said elementary, it made me think of, I was like, how come they haven't brought up the BBC Sherlock?
Yeah.
Because that definitely is an implied part of that relationship.
Yeah, so it's just funny that like if you Google the word, that comes up everywhere. So like I said before, there's some discussion on this, and there was an article in the BBC in April of 2019 called "Queerbaiting: Exploitation or a Sign of Progress" by Holly Hendrich, and essentially the accusation that she calls out here is that it's a somewhat like clickbait, right?
Yeah,
it all kind of is going back. I think everything's going back to clickbait tonight. Is that it's a calculated strategy. It's about targeting multiple audience demographics, and you're not offending either one of them. So you're not offending the conservative audience by having them come out explicitly and be gay, but you're also signaling, another hot button word, to an LGBTQ audience that you want them as well. It says in this article. They also talked about how Ariana Grande has been accused of signaling to a queer audience. She had a song in 2019 with Victoria Monet where she said, "I like women and men." But then she wouldn't come out and talk about her sexuality or anything. And frankly, I didn't go too far down this rabbit hole. So I have no idea and really don't care about her, what she does or who she likes. But, you know, it's one of those things that's pretty complex, and it's a complicated topic.
Yeah.
Steve, do you have any thoughts about this term or the concept itself?
I think it's interesting. I think it's kind of taking something that's out there and putting a term with it. I think to me, it's most interesting that you took something that was probably more of a junior high taunt and made it some sort of official marketing term that companies are looking at, or, you know, it happens enough that there seems to be the need for a term for it. I think back again to our virtue signaling episode, and also the research that Katie Martell provided about, it makes me again think of every June, how all the big companies get their, you know, are very prideful for 1 month at least. And, you know, Bud Light and their rainbow cans, and everybody else, you know, embraces the rainbow for a month and goes away. So I would say I would be more interested to see if this is something that, are you just trying to market to that community, or are you trying to take advantage of them? But in the end, I think it's smart, because if you are called out for that, they can kind of circle the rainbow wagons. And then if, you know, they're accused of marketing to LGBTQ plus, you forgot the plus, market. And I don't know. I think it makes sense. I think it's a smart move. Yeah.
And you asked the question in clickbait, is it good or bad? And it's like a lot of things. I think it just is. It's there can be some good that comes out of it. There can be some bad that comes out of it. It just is. It's gonna happen. You know, we live in a society. No, but it's just gonna happen. So I would agree. I was amazed. Just really had to bring this up. This is a little different than our normal news slang, but just the fact that you can look up the word queerbaiting and find queerbaiting is actually a thing. So hopefully we've all learned something today, and we're not dumber at this point. So that was new slang.
So I think for our final term, it plays very well with the other two terms that we've discussed. We've talked about with clickbait that sometimes you'll click on something, you think you're going to see pictures of Tina Yothers, but you find yourself scrolling through several other articles to get to that. And also with queerbaiting, you might be pulled in to see a lesbian relationship between Joe and Blair.
Absolutely.
But if it never really comes to fruition, did you get what you were brought in for? Which brings me to our final term, bait and switch. So to define bait and switch, I think everyone knows what it is, but just in case, we'll get on the same page. I'm going to actually use Wikipedia. Bait and switch is a form of fraud used in retail sales, but also employed in other contexts. First, customers are baited by merchants advertising products or services at a low price. but when customers visit the store, they discover that the advertised goods are not available, or the customer is pressured by salespeople to consider similar but high-priced items, which is the switching. So while the term bait and switch, I'll discuss here in a moment, was actually defined in 1964. The idea, I think, has been around since mankind's been able to trade or buy things. There's a reason caveat emptor, basically buyer beware, is known by everybody, because you're buying something, you need to be on the guard to make sure someone is not.
Well, hey, we talked about this with don't let the cat out of the bag.
Yeah.
You thought you were buying like a ham hock and you ended up with a cat in there.
So if you look up the etymology of this term, you will see frequent citations pointing back to something that the Federal Trade Commission did in 1964. So to my best research, I cannot find the first use of bait and switch, but you will find many resources that point back to that. I could not, however, find that. But I will bring in the FTC and kind of hit some things that they've noted, and I want to make sure everyone knows how much digging I did. So in going to the FTC, I could read you what they have there. It's written very much in FTC style language. But what they do, I think the best way to describe it is to kind of show a situation of what it is. So, but when you hear bait and switch referred to in terms of advertising, the FTC set some guidelines for what that equals. So that they are the ones that set the rules for that. So to go to a Consumer Reports article from 2007, what is the bait and switch and when is it illegal? Here's some quick guidelines. If the seller has the ability to sell you the bait but talks you into buying something else, that's not bait and switch. If the seller runs out of the bait but the advertisement specifies limited quantities, that's not bait and switch.
Yeah.
If the seller does not intend to sell you the bait and does any of the following in the course of selling other merchandise, then it's probably bait and switch. And that's basically in the lines that they give, disparages the bait or its warranty, employs compensation methods that discourage salespeople from selling the bait, refuses to take orders for the bait, refuses to make delivery of the bait, shows you a broken or defective product, fails to stock the bait. So if I think of Black Friday ads, you will see the television you can buy from $20, and it specifies it's a garbage brand always, and it's also specified limited quantities are there, 20 per store or whatever.
Right.
So basically,
but nobody's going to read all the fine print.
But it gets you in there. But they haven't bait and switched you. They've baited you, but they haven't. They're getting you in there. And I think we talked earlier about loss leaders, and I think this is a way to get people in the door.
Yeah, well, I think, too, I mean, I'm glad you read all that, because there's a difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And you hear the term bait and switch used a lot when it's not what you just said. I think most of the time people say bait and switch, it's not that. It's what's written in there makes it very hard for something to actually be truly bait and switch to that. You'd have to be nefarious almost to make that happen. So
with retail, I think that there's ways to get around that we've talked about. But I think there's other areas that you and I have both worked in or experienced. Basically, mortgages was the first one that I think of.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with that too, which is I have a complicated history with this bait and switch thing, because nobody wants to be baited and switched. Right. But when I was working as a loan consultant, and you may remember this as well, like you'd have somebody that would apply for a loan and the rate was whatever it was at the time. And then once they got approved, which may, depending on volume, be, a couple weeks later, the rate had gone up. Right. And it'd be, this is a bait and switch. You get a lot of irate customers or potential customers out of it, just because in their mind, they're not getting the deal that they thought they were getting. And along those lines, I was thinking about a couple of examples for me. Like, for example, we haven't talked about Columbia House in a few episodes. You could say that's a bait and switch because it's like 9, CDs for $1 a pop or whatever, penny, whatever it was, a penny. Yeah. But technically it's not a bait and switch because you read it. I mean, the deal is the deal. You get 9 and then you got to buy 6 more at like $30 a piece or whatever it is. So ultimately it's not bad, but it's, sometimes the spirit of it is a little bit deceitful. You talked about Black Friday. The funniest example though of bait and switch would have to be Nathan for you. When you got me thinking about it when you said the Black Friday and the TVs. He did did you see the one where he did the bait and switch stuff?
No.
Okay. So there's one where it's not really bait and switch, but it's along this line. And he says, so Best Buy had a deal that they would match any competitor's offer.
Okay.
And so he said, I'm going to sell this plasma TV for $1. And all these people came in, but the deal wasn't, the fine print was you had to like fit through this little square in a door and had to get past a live alligator to get to it. So technically he was allowed to do it. And the business owner was like, well, okay. And I don't know what the Best Buy thing, there was basically the idea was that you have people that would buy it and then they'd go return it. Who knows? You got to watch the show. But it's just an example of how you can get away those rules.
And I think with mortgage financing, I've seen situations, or I've heard of, I don't think I've participated. There's the one where there's an initial rate. But there's also the advertised rate. And you see this a lot, I think, with auto financing. You know, you can get 0% for 7 years if you qualify. Oh,
it always says that, you must have
800 plus credit, and there's things in there that maybe you won't have.
Right.
But the idea is you get there, you're getting past, you've kind of decided I want this. And I actually had something similar happen to me with a hotel. When I recently referenced my travel, I did a lot of research. I found the place I wanted to go. I went there, and as I'm signing in, there's a resort fee that's added that wasn't advertised.
I've had that happen. It probably the same place.
And I thought that was maybe that somehow is because I hadn't signed off on it yet, so I still had a chance to get out. Yeah. But they had found a way that that price wasn't as competitive when you added that resort fee in there.
Well, and I don't know if this was your situation. I think I'd gone through Expedia or Travelocity or one of those, and you're like, hey, this is a decent hotel, and this is actually a decent rate, and then got hit. But it's one of those things too where you're like, daggone it, I didn't read this. They're jerks for doing it this way. What am I going to do?
Right.
I'm going to pay the stupid resort fee.
Exactly.
And I would have gone down the road if I'd known about it.
And in the same way that clickbait appeals to something in you, there's some sort of psychology of when you're at that point of like, you know what, I'm this far. Yeah. I don't want to have to go back out and search through the other 30 hotels. I'm gonna just take it and hit that.
Yep.
So bait and switch is something that I guess it still is out there. The FTC has rules for it.
Yeah.
There seems to be enough conditions that are out there to help keep sellers from baiting and switching, while still pretty much, I'd say, doing it. It's
Absolutely.
not. It's a little bit of a, we're technically following the letter of the law, but at the same time, we know what we're doing. We're going to bait you in with the $50 Insignia television that won't be there by the time you get there. And you're going to buy something else because you got the fever for a TV.
That's right. Well, I'll give you one more. More. I think it was. I hesitate to say the name of the company because they all kind of do it, but it was probably one of the first times I got cable. Actually, I got a dish, and the big deal was it's like $29 a month or something. Yeah. And you really do think you've done you're like, okay, this is the deal, and then you get that first bill, and it's like $150, or whatever it is, and it's like, well, you got to pay. Wait, you don't know about the local this tax and the green tax and the everything else and the you're renting this equipment and you're doing this, and next thing you know, you're like
the resort fee for
there's
your
a resort
satellite
fee for your satellite. So I mean, that's another one that again technically doesn't fall under bait and switch. I think the lesson though that we all should take is like just don't expect the government to make some. I think sometimes we just go, oh, we're fine, you're fine. There's some law. They can't advertise something that they're not going to actually do. That's false advertising. But it's like, oh no, there's a million ad wizards and lawyers getting around the laws to essentially do the thing they're not supposed to do, but in a legal way.
Yeah, and I think it's a good, to kind of summate this whole episode of I think the idea of buyer beware is very good for all of us. Whether if you're on the internet and you're going to click on something, think about what is appealing to you to do that. Right. If you're watching a show that seems to hint at a certain relationship between two characters, think about, are they appealing? What are they appealing to you in a right way? Right. And maybe even with bait and switch, I think a lot of clickbait ends up being bait and switch.
Well, I mean, are there really local moms in my area that are dying to meet me?
Well, I'll tell you this, you won't believe what Tina Yothers has to say about it, but you'll have to click here to find out.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. This has been a blast. I hope you don't feel like you've been baited and switched. I think we kept pretty much to the topics we said we were going to. If you enjoy listening to the podcast, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you have the time, write a review. We'd really appreciate that. We've got a website, which is speaksies.com. We also have an Instagram and a Twitter, which are both at Speaksies. So if you get the time, please check that out. And once again, thanks so much for listening to Origin of Species. Bob's your uncle.
Watch out for bears, and kale is from the devil.
Speaksies.
Go away, baitin.